and you can't travel as fast. And on the Sabbath day, the zealots will have the gates of the city closed. And you're not supposed to travel more than half a mile on the Sabbath day, according to Orthodox Jewish teaching. And so pray that it's not in the winter. Pray it's not on the Sabbath day, because those would be hindrances in the destruction of Jerusalem of you getting out. There will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. It was a terrible, terrible catastrophe. And Jesus continues. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. At that time, if anyone says to you, look, here's the Messiah, or there he is, do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. The devil can do miracles. Evil teachers can do miracles. The Bible warns that if someone comes and does a miracle and doesn't preach the Word of God, don't believe the miracle, believe the Word. And so the devil works counterfeit signs. See, I told you ahead of time. So if anyone tells you, there he is out in the wilderness, do not go out. Or here he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as lightning comes from the east is visible even in the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever there is a carcass, there the vultures will gather. You know, you see buzzards circling. You know there's a dead body somewhere. And Jesus says, look, when you see the buzzard circling, you see these things happening, you know that something dead and decaying and rotten is about to happen. He's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, so verses 4 to 14 mirror each other about the destruction of Jerusalem and about the time that will happen to the end of the world. Verses 15 down through 28 talk about the destruction of Jerusalem specifically. But now in verse 29, immediately after the stress of those things, immediately after, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from heaven, the heavenly bodies will be shaken. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. Then all the peoples of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. He will send his angels with a loud trumpet call. They will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. So verses 29 through verse 31. Some people think it's talking about the second coming of Jesus Christ. That Jesus will come. Of course, he hasn't come yet. And the word immediately is a problem in verse 29 because it hasn't been immediately. It's been nearly 1900 years plus. But that will be the next great calamity that will affect. And Jesus moves in from the destruction of Jerusalem, skips over 2,000 years of time and comes and maybe even further till the end. And these are apocalyptic wording here in verse 29. Sun will be darkened, moon not give its light, stars fall from heaven, heavenly bodies will be shaken. That's language that speaks of catastrophes in government, catastrophes in the world. And that's just poetic, figurative description, not literally stars falling from heaven, the moon turning to blood, and other things. Joel chapter 2 prophesies things like that, that Peter says in Acts 2, this is fulfilled on the day of Pentecost, in the resurrection of Jesus and the destruction of the Jewish cause. And so this is to be applied figuratively, not literally. And some people think that verse 29 to 31 is still talking about the growth of the kingdom of God past the destruction of Jerusalem and not the end of the world. And he'll send his angels, the word is messengers, and preachers will go out and call people from everywhere to come into the gospel, from one end of the heavens to the other. So those are problematic verses 29 to 32, 31. But now 32. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and the leaves come out, you know the summer's near. Even so, when you see all these things, you know it's near, right at the door. Truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. This is problematic. Because if you'll notice, he says in 33, when you see all these things, the things he's talking about in the destruction, the signs of Jerusalem will be encompassed by armies, Luke adds, that Matthew doesn't say. You know that the time is near. And Jesus says, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have been accomplished. And so, that generation did pass away. The word generation is about 12 times in Matthew, and it always refers to a period of 30 to 40 years of life. And so, the end has not happened. Well, what we think is happening in 32, Jesus is going back to the destruction of Jerusalem. So, what he does is intermingle the end of the world and the destruction of Jerusalem. So he talked about both the destruction of Jerusalem and the end of the world up through verse 14. Then he talked about the destruction of Jerusalem in verse 15 down through 28 and maybe all the way through 31. And then he comes back to the destruction of Jerusalem in 32 and says, when you see all these things, you know it's near. You can tell there are signs about the destruction of Jerusalem. And this generation will not pass away until all of it's accomplished. And it was accomplished within the next 40 years. He's not talking about the end of the world. He's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. But verse 36. But about that day and hour, no one knows. Now, watch it. He says you can see signs and you know it's near from 32 down to 34. You know the destruction of Jerusalem is coming when you see the armies coming. And for 4 years, the Romans began to take village after village after village as the Jews revolted in a big rebellion against the Romans. And he says, you know it's coming. You see the signs. The trees are budding, which is a sign summer's coming. And so you know you see these signs. There are signs of the destruction of Jerusalem. But, that's a strong word in 36. But, about that day and hour, the end of the world, because it asks about it, when will this happen? What will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? The end of the age is the same language in Matthew 28, the same book, verse 20. Preach the gospel, and I'll be with you always to the end of the age. Same word. But about that day and hour, no one knows. That's the end of the world. There are no signs of the end of the world. No signs that have not been true in every generation. We don't have any signs. No signs. There have been wars, there's been earthquakes, there's been famines, there's been persecution, there's Christians being killed, there's been apostasy. That's been going on for 2,000 years. There's no new signs. There's nothing any different. It's just life goes on. Sin prevails. Wickedness is here. And he says, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Jesus limited his knowledge because of his incarnation, because he became flesh. He got thirsty, he got hungry, he had to sleep, he bled on the cross, he died. And he says, I've limited my knowledge. I don't know. The Father knows that. That doesn't say Jesus doesn't know now, but at that time, in the flesh, he said no one knows. And then he goes on to tell us, as it was in the days of Noah, so it would be the coming of the Son of Man. In the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. Is there anything wrong with eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage? No. It just means life goes on. People get married, have babies, die. People eat and drink, throw parties, live and die. We do, and it's been going on for 2,000 years. But the point is, these things happened, and they knew it not till the flood took them away because they didn't listen. They were surprised by death. They were surprised by the flood. And so it will be when Jesus comes again, people will say, I didn't know. I wasn't prepared. I didn't know. There are going to be many people unprepared because they don't listen. They don't read their Bible. They don't seek God. That's how it's going to be at the coming of the Son of Man. 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken, the other left. 2 women will be grinding with a hand mill, one taken, the other left. That is, 2 people are going to be doing the most intimate things together. Maybe husband and wife sleeping in the same bed. People working together, side by side. People doing things together. And all of a sudden the end comes. And one is taken to be with the Lord and the other's left. And so even intimate fellowship will be broken. Therefore keep watch. You do not know what day the Lord will come. There are no signs of the second coming except the signs that have always been here. Famine, earthquake, wars, persecution. Be ready. But if the owner of the house had known at what time of the night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch and would not have let his house be broken into. So you also must be ready. The Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. We don't have any signs of Jesus is coming. We just got to be ready. It could happen today. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen 1,000 years from now, 10,000 years from now. Be ready. Be ready. Be ready. Be ready. Be ready. Who then is the faithful and wise servant whom the master has put in charge of the servants in his household to give them their food at the proper time? It will be good for that servant whose master finds them doing so when he returns. Truly, I tell you, he'll put him in charge of all his possessions. But suppose that servant is wicked and says to himself, my master's staying away a long time. And he begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with drunkards. The master of that servant will come on a day he does not expect him, at an hour he's not aware. He will cut him to pieces, assigning a place for the hypocrites where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Warning, be ready. So what are the two warnings today? Warning number one, don't get too excited about the end of the world. To the point that that's all you think about. To the point that all you study is prophecy. To the point that you make out a chart when God's going to do certain things. God's got to follow this plan. Jesus says, don't get so excited and alarmed that captivates you and totally takes your interest. A man on television was preaching about the end of the world and all the prophecies. And he had a chart, had it all laid out, just as though God had to follow his plan. And he didn't tell anybody at the end of his sermon about how to live or what to do. He simply closed it like this. Send me more money and I'll give you more prophecies. And there are books that are written and magazine articles and all kinds of things on the front page of newspapers about people saying the end of the world is here. Jesus said, don't believe it. Don't get alarmed. It's business as usual. So don't get too excited to the point that you lose your sanity, you lose your ethical living, your faithfulness. Warning number one. Warning number two, don't go to sleep. Be awake. Be alert. Don't be negligent. Christ is coming. The end will occur. You will die or Jesus will come first. It's going to happen. The baby in the womb is going to come out. Jesus used that illustration of birth pains, and you're going to face the end. And so don't go to sleep. Many Christians today are asleep. You're asleep. You're asleep. 40% of church members don't even open their Bible during the week. Most churches have a big stack of Bibles in the back, on the chair back there, or a table, where church members have left their Bibles there during the week and lost them in church because they never opened it during the week. How much do you pray? How much do you think about Christ? How much do you think about sharing the gospel? Don't be asleep. As Cody prayed in his prayer, the most important thing is to share the gospel. Jesus says, be faithful, getting people saved, getting people to heaven is the greatest thing in the world, not trying to understand prophecy. If you don't understand Matthew 24 and exactly which verse applies to the second coming and which verse applies to the destruction of Jerusalem, you can still go to heaven. The important thing is to be ready. Be ready. Be ready. Don't go to sleep. And so Jesus tells us here, be faithful. Be faithful. That's what I appreciate about Indian Creek Church. They started in 1860, 158 years ago. They're still meeting. Not the same people, of course. Generation after generation after generation after generation after generation. It's kind of like runners in a race if you watch track and field. They have the baton. One runner's carrying that baton, and he reaches out and he passes it to the next runner. He takes the baton and he runs his lap and he passes it to the next one. And the first runner and the second runner drop out. That's what's happened in 158 years. Those that started the church, they dropped out because they died. But somebody's carrying the baton. I want to know who's going to carry the baton in Pittsfield. Who's going to carry the baton? Many of us are white-headed. We're getting older. We're dying. Who's going to carry the baton to the next generation? Will the church survive? You know, good folks, I believe in aesthetics. I believe in beautiful lighting and air conditioning and fans and sound systems, and basements have been renovated and fellowship halls and all of that, and crystal chandeliers. It's beautiful, it's nice. But let me tell you, the temple had all of that too. And what happened to the temple? Jesus said, it's gone. So the most important thing about this church is not raising a budget to meet the budget so we can build things, because it's going to be turned into cinders and ashes when Jesus comes. The most important thing is sharing the faith, keeping the faith, living the faith every day of our life, and passing the baton to the next generation. That's what we got to get out. So wake up. Wake up. Are you praying for the growth of this church? Are you praying and ministering that God will preserve the church family and it will grow and more people will be saved, not just here, but around the world? That's what Jesus wants. And when we do that, we'll be ready. We'll be ready. If you're subject to God's call, come on up, Mike. Let's sing this song. Let's stand and sing. We can help you in any way respond to the gospel. Do so now. God bless you.